Before we begin, listener, remember to gently tap like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Tonight, I'll take you through the quiet halls where the walls still breathe, where every sound means something, even when no one's there to make it. 5 stories, each one a whisper left behind by those who never truly left. So, turn down the lights, lie still, and listen carefully, because some sounds don't stop when you wake up. The corpse that sat up in Venice. I took the night vaporetto to San Michele because Father Aurelio said the island is calmer when the tides are tired. The water hissed under the hull, black as wet velvet, and the bells on the city side answered themselves in threes, as if the sound were throwing stones across the canal and counting the skips. I was only the assistant, the one who carried the kit. Linen bands, a thin vial of myrrh, a stub of white chalk that left a cold taste on the tongue if you licked it by accident. 3 knocks before the veil opens, he had told me, and he said it like an old recipe. We were late to the vault. Lantern light skated across names carved into marble, the letters damp and swallowing shadows. Somewhere, water dripped in the dark, and, under it, something else breathed slow, measured, as though practicing for an audience. The body lay with its mouth sewn closed, thread taut as a violin string. My job was to mark the circle and whisper the Latin backwards to sour the air. The thread quivered. Then, from inside the chest, I heard it knock, knock, knock. The veil didn't open. It folded inward. The lantern shivered, though the air was still. Father Aurelio froze. His lips parted as if listening to a memory rather than a sound. The vault was small, carved from damp stone, the kind that holds a chill like a living thing. 3 marble coffins lined the walls. Each one bore a rusted plaque, and on each plaque was the same date, November 3rd, 1891. The priest murmured, "Spiritus non dormit," and crossed himself. Then he did something I had never seen him do. He stepped back from the body. Usually, he would begin at once holy water, psalm, command. But now he looked afraid to speak. "Hold the light," he whispered. The circle I had drawn in chalk looked thinner now, the lines sweating down the slab as though the stone rejected it. From somewhere behind the wall came a noise soft, dragging, like fabric sliding across marble. I turned the lantern that way, but the sound moved too, tracing the edges of the vault, circling us. When it passed behind the coffin, the thread sealing the corpse's mouth slackened slightly. I swallowed hard. "Father, did you hear?" "Hush. 1. He placed 2 fingers on the corpse's sternum. "Still warm," he said. His eyes flicked up to me, but the burial was 3 days ago. Was and of crease. I wanted to blame the damp, the smell, the faint drip of the canal seeping in through the stone. Venice is a city that never dries, and perhaps the dead here never quite finish dying. But when Father Aurelio bent to check again, the body's head rolled sideways on the slab slowly, like a sleeper turning toward a whisper. The lantern hissed. The flame guttered. In that half-dark, the sound of breathing returned steady, wet, human. It wasn't ours. Every exhale came with a tremor that shook dust from the vaulted ceiling. And then a single word emerged between the breaths, drawn out, uncertain. "Auri." Father Aurelio lurched back, his robes brushing the chalk circle, erasing a line. The air grew heavy, sweet with the scent of myrrh. I felt it coat the back of my throat, syrupy, cloying, and underneath the sweetness something metallic, like the taste of coins. He pressed the crucifix to the corpse's chest, but the breathing only deepened. When he looked at me again, his face was gray. "It knows my name," he said. "And if it speaks yours next, run." "Well, Mencher." The knock came again 3 times, from inside the coffin beside us, this time slow, deliberate, answering something unseen. That was the first moment I realized the ritual wasn't calling anything out. It was waking what was already in. The second knock struck like a heartbeat echoing through water. The vault trembled. Tiny flecks of marble dust cascaded from the ceiling, settling on the corpse's face like snow. Father Aurelio's hand wavered. "Hold the light higher," he said, voice thin. But the lantern's glow had turned the color of honeyed smoke, its flame bending toward the coffin, as if drawn by a breath that wasn't ours. From somewhere deep inside, the wall came a wet scraping, a rhythm of stone against stone, measured, patient. Then it stopped. Silence gathered so completely that I could hear my own pulse, an uneven flutter in my ears. And then the same noise again, closer now, just beyond the slabs. Something was moving inside the walls of the dead. Father Aurelio began to chant in Latin, his tone deliberate and trembling. The syllables struck the air like nails. "In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti." The echo didn't return. Instead, a whisper threaded itself through his prayer, repeating each word backward, syllable for syllable, as though the stone itself mocked him. The smell of myrrh thickened, seeping through the cracks like incense from an unseen censer. It clung to my lungs. I could taste the sweetness curdling. I wanted to leave to climb the steps, to breathe the lagoon air, but the stairwell was now only darkness, as if the entrance had folded shut. Then came the breathing. Not from the corpse, but from behind it, slow, deliberate inhalations, too close, too measured. The priest turned. The marble slab trembled under the body's weight. The linen around its chest pulsed slightly, rising and falling. He pressed the crucifix again, whispering faster. The echoing voice followed him like a shadow of sound, its cadence wrong, disjointed, as if it were imitating language rather than speaking it. It wasn't repetition, it was learning. The lantern flickered once, and in that half-second of dark, I heard something shift, a scrape, a pop of joint, the quiet hiss of skin stretching against decay. When light returned, the corpse's mouth thread had snapped. Its lips were parted, not wide, just enough to form the shape of a word. You, to be ironed. The syllable was soft, a breath more than a voice, yet it filled the room like thunder swallowed underwater. The other coffins began to answer knock, 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 each one slightly out of sync, like a grotesque metronome. I dropped the lantern. It rolled across the floor, its flame painting the vault in swaying gold. In that glow, something wet traced down the wall. Handprints, pale and reversed, fingers pointing downward from the ceiling. "Do not step outside the circle," Father Aurelio ordered. But the circle was broken. I had seen the chalk smear under his robe earlier. I looked down, and the line was already bleeding inward, the dust dissolving into the stone like it was being inhaled. Aurelio began to sing a psalm I'd never heard, melody quivering between prayer and lullaby. The whispering voice joined him, harmonizing in perfect inversion. Every word he raised, it sank. Every note he stretched, it folded back into silence. And in that warped duet, I felt something ancient awaken, something that understood music not as beauty, but as command. The vault pulsed, the air thickening into vibration. I couldn't hear the city anymore, no water, no wind, only the layered rhythm of knocking and breathing, and that low, unending hum. Father Aurelio's candle blew out. The darkness didn't fall, it arrived. And within it, the sound became almost unbearable. 1,000 heartbeats overlapping, forming words without mouths. Then, from all around us, 3 final knocks resounded, each louder than the last, until the very stone cracked. After that, nothing moved. Not the priest, not the corpse. Only the dripping water resumed, like applause from something patient, watching. The silence after the last knock was so deep that my own breathing sounded foreign. Father Aurelio didn't move. He kept the crucifix raised, its metal trembling against the dim glow of the lantern that somehow refused to die. A thin crack ran across the marble beneath the corpse, the fissure glistening with something dark and slow, too thick to be water, too warm to be anything but blood. The smell of myrrh sharpened, metallic now, mingling with that copper scent. Aurelio drew a trembling breath. "Do you see it?" he whispered. At first, I saw nothing, only the still shape of the body on the slab. Then its chest began to rise. Not the shallow lift of gas escaping decay, but the measured rhythm of someone breathing. The corpse's eyelids fluttered open, but the eyes beneath were filmed white, moon-like. "Stay back," the priest warned, voice cracking. He began to recite the Rituale Romanum, his Latin clipped and rapid. But the air seemed to thicken around the words. Each phrase left his mouth distorted, sinking into a guttural echo that came not from him, but from beneath the slab. "Aqua sancta," he began. "Aqua sanctum," the echo replied, the consonants bending backward. The corpse's head turned toward me. It shouldn't have been able to. The neck made a slow, grinding noise, bone on bone. Its lips moved, pale threads of saliva stretching like silk. "You brought it back," it whispered. I didn't know if it meant Aurelio or me. The priest threw holy water across the slab. The droplets sizzled where they touched skin, releasing wisps of white vapor. The corpse shuddered, and something like laughter spilled from its throat, low, rhythmic, almost tender. "You burn what's already burning," it said. Then the second coffin lid shifted. A scraping sound tore through the vault. The stone moved half an inch. Inside, something knocked back. Aurelio lunged toward it, pressing his crucifix against the seal. The air around him pulsed, a wave of heat so sudden I staggered. My lantern burst, scattering sparks across the floor. For a heartbeat, I saw it. A hand, gray and thin, reaching from the crack beneath the first slab, groping upward as if feeling for the priest's feet. He shouted a prayer, voice raw. "Recede, Damon. In nomine Christi, way." But the voice that answered came from everywhere. "Christ is already here, too selfin." The vault shook. Statues embedded in the alcoves began to weep, a trickle of salt water down stone faces. The air filled with a chorus of whispers, hundreds of them, layered so tightly they sounded like wind screaming through an organ pipe. I grabbed Aurelio's sleeve. "We have to go," and Felton for Maine. He didn't turn. His eyes were fixed on the corpse, which now sat fully upright, its arms resting calmly on its knees, as though it had just awoken from prayer. It tilted its head. A soft cracking followed as its jaw loosened, then opened too wide, revealing a mouth filled not with teeth but with darkness, an absence so absolute it hurt to look at. From that darkness came 3 knocks, muffled but clear, as if from inside a door that led somewhere beneath us. Aurelio stumbled backward. "The circle's gone," he gasped. "It's not bound. No stand." "What do we do?" I shouted. He hesitated, then whispered, "We give it a name. It can't hold shape without one, oneself." He began listing the names of saints, each syllable heavy with desperation. Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, but the corpse only smiled wider, and the knocking grew louder, shaking dust from the rafters. When he reached the last name, his voice broke, and in the name of Aurelio, the corpse repeated it perfectly. Then it stopped moving. The stillness felt wrong, waiting. Aurelio lowered the crucifix, chest heaving. "Perhaps it's over," he said, voice paper thin. But as he turned, the voice came again, from behind him this time, whispering in his exact tone, "Perhaps it's over. Howery's self." He spun back. The corpse was gone. Only the empty slab remained, and on it, the crucifix lay, burning faintly red, as though it had been held in a furnace. I heard the first step behind us, light, deliberate, bare feet on stone. Then the breathing returned, right between us. It exhaled one word, "Stay." "Where?" And the vault door began to close, slowly, sealing us in. The door sealed with a sound like a sigh, soft, final. Dust drifted down through the lantern smoke, settling over Father Aurelio's shoulders as he stood frozen before the slab. The crucifix lay in his palm, faintly warm, pulsing once with each of his heartbeats. For the first time since I had met him, he looked old. The certainty that had lived in his spine seemed to leak away with every breath. "Listen," he whispered. And for a moment, I did, but there was nothing. No knocks, no breathing, only the distant lap of canal water somewhere beyond the stone. It felt as though the vault itself had inhaled and finally stopped holding its breath. The air was still, heavy with the sweetness of myrrh and the faint sting of iron. "Maybe it left," I said. He didn't answer. He reached to touch the slab where the corpse had been, tracing the empty outline with his fingers. The marble was cold, but dry now. No blood, no sign of the fissure. We stood there in silence until the lantern began to wane, its flame dimming to a weak orange bead. The stillness grew soothing, almost gentle. Outside, I could hear the faint echo of bells, ordinary bells, ringing from the other side of the lagoon. For a strange moment, I believed we had won. Perhaps whatever had answered us had returned to sleep. Perhaps the ritual had simply ended. Father Aurelio crossed himself, lips moving without sound. Then he turned to me, the faintest tremor in his smile. "It's over," he said. "We close the vault and leave. Chains." I nodded, dizzy with relief. We began to gather the tools, the chalk, the water flask, the shreds of linen. I remember thinking that it was strange how the chalk, once wet and slick, was now bone dry, crumbling easily between my fingers. When I lifted the lantern, something glimmered on the wall. A mark, small and circular, freshly carved into the stone. I stepped closer, tracing its shape. It was no Latin sigil, it was a fingerprint, pressed deep enough to leave a hollow. 3 of them, in a perfect triangle. Father, he looked up, and in that same instant, the bells outside stopped mid-ring. The sound hung for half a heartbeat, then inverted itself, the resonance folding backward, echoing from below instead of above. The vault brightened, not with light, but with motion shadows lifting themselves from corners, bending like smoke against the ceiling. I blinked, certain it was the lantern's flicker playing tricks. But Aurelio had gone still again, his face drained of color. He whispered, "Do you smell that?" As Sakadi. I did. The scent of myrrh was gone. In its place came something sour, earthy like damp soil turned by a spade. And underneath it, something far more human. The faint, unmistakable smell of decay. The slab trembled. Only once, faintly, as if a sigh rose from underneath. Aurelio leaned forward, crucifix extended, but no sound followed. We both exhaled. He turned back to me and managed a laugh short, brittle. "Fear makes fools of us," he said. "There's nothing left here. Ready?" He reached for the door handle. That was when I saw the fingerprints again, this time on his neck. 3 perfect circles, the same depth, the same spacing. As if something had touched him while we weren't looking. "Father," I began, but he had already opened the door. A rush of cold air spilled in, and with it, a sound so faint it almost passed for wind. Knock, knock, knock. He froze. Then the air turned colder, and the sound came again, louder now, as though the city itself had joined the knocking. It wasn't from the vault. It was from everywhere, the walls, the floor, the steps above, the canals outside. Aurelio staggered back, clutching his chest. Through the narrow gap of the doorway, I saw the night beyond the vault had changed, the mist rolling over. The water glowed faintly red, like the reflection of unseen fires. The priest whispered, "We shouldn't have spoken its name. Tatation." His voice cracked. I can still hear it breathing. Kamzef. Then, from far across the water, a chorus answered him, hundreds of voices murmuring his words back, one heartbeat behind, echoing him perfectly. And in that echo, mine joined too, unbidden, my own voice repeating, "We shouldn't have spoken its name. I am so." The vault door began to swing shut again, slowly, without anyone touching it. Aurelio turned toward me, eyes wide, and for a moment I thought he might run. Instead, he smiled, weakly. "At least it's quieter now," he said. Then, softly, from somewhere behind the slab, came a whisper that did not belong to either of us. Quieter, now. And the 3 knocks returned, steady as a heartbeat, but this time from beneath our feet. The floor shuddered as if something massive stirred beneath it, rolling over in its sleep. The sound was deep, low, almost tender like the sea breathing through stone. My lantern quivered in my hand, its light flaring and shrinking with each pulse. Aurelio stumbled back, pressing the crucifix to his chest. The 3 knocks came again, louder this time, shaking dust from the ceiling in a slow rain of gray. "Get behind me," he rasped. But there was nowhere left to stand. The vault's single door, half closed, began to groan as though resisting an invisible tide. The air was thick enough to taste sour, metallic, and strangely sweet, like burnt myrrh. Then the cracks appeared. They spread across the marble slabs like veins, glowing faintly red from within. The fissures pulsed in rhythm with the knocking, bleeding thin rivulets of dark fluid that steamed on contact with the air. Aurelio fell to his knees, murmuring in Latin fragments, desperate, tangled, Deus, libera nos, in tenebris. His voice trembled. The words slipped through his lips, half prayer, half confession. I didn't recognize the man kneeling before me. He wasn't a priest anymore. He was a frightened old man, whispering to whatever might still be listening. The slab beneath the missing corpse cracked open with a muffled pop. The air gushed upward, cold and wet, carrying with it a faint hum, the sound of something enormous sighing in satisfaction. The fissure widened, revealing darkness so deep it looked solid. And from that blackness, a shape began to crawl out. It wasn't the corpse. It was what the corpse had become. A long, white arm, boneless and slick, reached over the slab, fingers tapping 3 times before gripping the edge. Then another. The figure that pulled itself free moved without rhythm, as though learning how to inhabit its own limbs. Its face was featureless, skin stretched tight, but its chest bore a hollow where the heart should be a black cavity breathing in and out. Aurelio's crucifix glowed faintly, trembling in his hand. He rose, voice breaking, in nomen Christi, ego te adjuro, and was action. The figure tilted its head, listening like a curious child. Then it repeated him perfectly, his tone, his accent, his fear, in nomine Christi. But it didn't stop. It kept speaking, copying everything he said, overlapping his words, until his own voice was buried beneath its mimicry. The priest's knees buckled. He dropped the crucifix. The metal hit the floor with a sound that should have been a clink, but instead, it rang, long and low, like the first toll of a funeral bell. The sound shattered the silence. Every coffin in the vault split open. From within, pale shapes began to rise, half-formed, writhing, whispering prayers that weren't meant for human throats. They filled the chamber, their voices braided into a single tone of longing and grief. The walls began to pulse with light. Not light from the lantern, but from the stones themselves, carved sigils, burning one by one, ancient and red. Each mark was a wound, opening and closing as though breathing. Aurelio screamed, "The gate! It's the gate!" Question. He turned to me, eyes wild. "It's beneath us. Run." Tex. But there was nowhere to run. The door was sealed shut. The steps had melted into the wall, replaced by the same smooth stone now covered in crawling inscriptions. The only way out was the narrow fissure where the corpse had lain. And from that fissure, a voice began to sing. It was beautiful, terrible. A hymn so pure that it hurt to hear melody stretched thin, trembling between worship and despair. The words were Latin, but inverted, their meanings devoured. I felt each note slide behind my eyes, pulling at something deep within me. I wanted to kneel. I wanted to listen forever. Then Father Aurelio gripped my arm with a strength I didn't think he had left. "Don't listen," he gasped. "If you listen, it remembers you." But he tore a silver chain from his neck and pressed it into my hand. "Go. Way." Before I could answer, he turned toward the fissure, raising his voice above the hymn. He began to recite Psalm 91, the same prayer he had taught me to whisper when fear came in dreams. But the voice in the fissure began to echo him, just as before, and for each word he spoke, it spoke too. The ground buckled. The red light surged, swallowing the marble in waves. The corpses shuddered, their whispering melting into laughter, a sound without joy. Then came the roar, not of anger, but of hunger. Aurelio shouted one last time, voice breaking, "Go now." Had his fired, and before I could stop him, he stepped into the fissure. The light vanished. The hymn cut off mid-note. Silence rushed in, cold and absolute. Only my own ragged breathing remained. For a heartbeat, I thought it was over. Then, from the darkness ahead, 3 faint knocks sounded, soft as fingertips on a coffin lid. And a voice, his voice, whispered, "Run." Well, I turned and slammed my shoulder against the vault door. It gave way with a shriek of iron and stone, spilling me into the corridor above. Cold air flooded my lungs. I didn't look back. I ran up the steps, past the carved angels, through the archway, and out into the night. Venice had changed. The lagoon glowed red under a sky that pulsed like a wound. The bells were ringing again, but this time they weren't chiming hours. They were answering each other, calling across the city in patterns of 3. I stumbled to the dock, gasping. The vaporetto was gone. Only water remained dark, mirror still. And when I looked down into it, I saw not my reflection, but Father Aurelio's face, eyes open, mouth moving soundlessly. I leaned closer, unable to stop myself. His lips formed the words, over and over, until I understood. 3 knocks. 1 for the door. 1 for the name. 1 for you, chair. Then the water rippled, and he was gone. I heard the knocks again, this time from behind me, inside the stones of the island itself. Knock. 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 And somewhere below, in the dark belly of the vault, something began to breathe again. I didn't remember how I reached the mainland. When I came to, the sun was rising over the canals, the sky washed clean of red. The police said I'd been found drifting in a small funeral boat, alone, half-conscious, clutching a broken chain and a charred crucifix. They said there was no island that night. San Michel had been closed for repairs since spring. But I remembered the door, the vault, and the sound. They took my statement, wrote hallucination brought on by stress, and sent me away. No one asked why the marble dust on my clothes smelled of myrrh, or why my skin along the spine was bruised in 3 perfect circles, like fingertips. I left Venice that evening. The city looked ordinary again, tourists laughing, pigeons cooing, bells ringing soft in the distance. Every ring came in 3s. I checked into a narrow pension near Santa Croce. The window overlooked the canal. The curtains swayed even when there was no wind. I lit a candle and tried to pray, but my voice refused to leave my throat. When the wick flickered, I saw movement on the glass, a reflection behind me. For a second, I thought it was my own shadow. Then it smiled. 3 soft knocks sounded from the other side of the mirror. I froze. The same rhythm, the same patience. Knock, knock, knock. The flame bent toward the sound. I stood, trembling, the chain still in my hand. In the reflection, The figure of Father Aurelio stood just beyond my shoulder, his eyes calm now, mouth stitched shut with black thread. He raised one hand and pointed not at me, but at the door. Someone was standing outside, their silhouette visible through the frosted glass. They knocked 3 times and whispered in perfect imitation of my own voice, "Are you ready for the next one?" To today. The candle died. The smell of myrrh returned. And from somewhere beneath the floor, something breathed slow, heavy, patient. Story 2. The House on Rue des Moines. Paris was supposed to be louder. I thought that would help me sleep. Noise, laughter, the blur of cars and rain, anything to drown out the memory of 3 knocks echoing under stone. But the apartment on Rue des Moines was quiet, too quiet. The landlord, an old woman with milk-white eyes, said it used to belong to a priest who vanished during the war. She smiled when she handed me the key, whispering, "He left things unfinished. You will finish them." "Yes." "Where?" I thought she was joking. The place smelled faintly of myrrh and dust. The floors bowed, and the furniture seemed arranged for someone taller than me. In the living room stood a single wooden chair facing the wall, its legs sunk slightly into the boards, as though it had been sitting there a long, long time. That first night, I unpacked the small crucifix I had kept since Venice. The metal was blackened and cracked, but I couldn't throw it away. When I placed it on the table, the room sighed, and somewhere above the ceiling, slow and deliberate, came 3 knocks. Exactly the same rhythm I had left behind on Saint Michel. The knocks came again the next night, same rhythm, same patience. 3 deliberate taps, like someone testing the weight of the ceiling above my bed. Then silence, long enough for me to start believing I'd imagined it. Paris had its own sounds, creaking pipes, footsteps on the old stairwell, the sigh of the Seine outside the window. But this was different. It had the same breathing pause between each knock, the same pause I'd heard beneath the marble in Venice, the same rhythm that still haunted my sleep. I told myself it was the neighbors. Yet when I climbed the narrow stair the next morning, the corridor above mine was empty. The floorboards were thick with dust. Every door was nailed shut. The landlady caught me on the landing, her blind eyes glinting. "Don't go up there," she said. Her fingers brushed my wrist cold and dry, like parchment. Each floor remembers its dead. And that night I pushed a chair beneath the ceiling and pressed my ear against the plaster. I heard nothing at first, just the faint throb of blood in my temples. Then, very softly, a man's voice whispered from beyond the wall, not speaking, reciting. The syllables rolled like prayer. De profundis clamaviad te, Domine. Psalm 130. The same one Father Aurelio used to hum when cleaning his tools. I stumbled down, heart hammering, knocking the crucifix from the table. It hit the floor with that same metallic bell tone I'd heard in the vault, long, low, wrong. When the echo faded, the air thickened with the familiar scent of myrrh. I could taste it on my tongue again, syrupy and ancient. The chair in the corner had moved, not far, just enough to change its angle. Now it faced the window. Outside, Paris shimmered with rainlight, and the street lamps bent their reflections into golden spears across the glass. And in that blurred reflection, I saw a man sitting in the chair. Not a ghostly blur or a trick of glass, a man, robed in black, hands folded as if in prayer. He was looking at me, though his face was calm, eyes shut. "Father Aurelio," I whispered. The reflection smiled. Then the glass fogged from inside. 3 small circles appeared where unseen fingers had pressed against it. The room grew colder, and the lights dimmed one by one, until only the faint glow of the crucifix on the floor remained. The metal trembled, humming softly like a tuning fork. And above, through the ceiling, came that same voice again, closer now, tender, as though speaking right into my ear. "Don't be afraid. You brought me here. She has self." That night, I didn't dare turn off the lights. Paris outside had fallen into a steady drizzle, each raindrop smearing the window pane like slow-moving tears. The city's noises, cars, footsteps, laughter seemed to fade the moment I stepped into the living room. It was as if the world beyond the glass had been muted, and all that remained was the hollow rhythm of my own breathing. The chair still faced the window. I told myself I'd imagined the figure from before, a trick of reflection and fear. Yet the fabric on the seat bore a faint indentation, the ghost of weight long gone. I moved toward it, crucifix in hand. The metal was cold enough to sting my skin. The closer I came, the heavier the air grew, as though the room itself had begun to breathe with me. Then, faintly, a sound slipped through the ceiling. Not a knock this time. A soft, deliberate scraping, slow as fingernails tracing wood. It circled above, following me wherever I stepped. When I stopped, it stopped. When I moved again, it followed, never hurried, never far. "Father," I whispered, though I didn't know why. The scraping paused. Then came 3 knocks, gentle and almost affectionate. I should have run. But some part of me, some wounded, curious fragment, wanted to answer. So I lifted the handle of the crucifix and tapped the floor 3 times in return. The reply came instantly. Knock, knock, knock. Each strike deeper, heavier, until dust rained from the ceiling in slow white spirals. The chandelier swayed, metal arms creaking like an old pendulum. Then came the voices. At first, a single whisper, impossible to place. Then another. Then dozens. Men, women, children, all speaking softly in unison, overlapping like echoes from different times. They were reciting prayers, Latin, French, something older I couldn't name. Their tones were reverent, but wrong, too calm, too even. The air chilled so quickly my breath fogged. A pressure built behind my eyes, a vibration that felt like sound had turned physical. Every word they spoke began to merge into one long note, rising higher, thinner, until it was almost unbearable. I clutched the crucifix and shouted, "Stop! Rounder!" Silence. Utter, ringing silence. The lights flickered. When they steadied, the chair was no longer by the window. It was behind me, and in it sat a shape. The robes were black, soaked as though with seawater. The head bowed slightly, hands clasped, posture almost peaceful. It looked like Father Aurelio, but the skin on his face was gray, tight, and his mouth was stitched shut with black thread. He lifted his head. The stitches strained, a faint, wet sound. The candlelight flickered, and I saw his eyes glossy, unfocused, but aware. His chest moved once, sharply, and from between the sewn lips, came a muffled whisper that still reached my ears. Finish it. As der Auften in. The temperature dropped again. The windows began to sweat, trails of condensation forming symbols I didn't recognize, circles within circles, each connected by 3 dots. I backed toward the door, but the handle refused to turn. It pulsed faintly beneath my palm, warm like flesh. Then I heard it again scraping, but this time from inside the walls. Something was moving, dragging its fingers along the wooden beams, tracing slow paths around the room. Every circuit ended with 3 sharp taps on the plaster, as if marking its completion. The voices returned, quieter now, whispering just one phrase. 3 knocks open, 3 knocks close, to have mange. My crucifix slipped from my hand. The sound it made when hitting the floor wasn't metal, it was wet. I looked down. The wood beneath my feet had darkened, glossy and red. When I raised my eyes again, the chair was empty. But the scent of myrrh hung thick and heavy, pressing against the inside of my lungs. Then a whisper from the ceiling, barely audible but undeniably human, reached me. Upstairs, ready. The stairwell door creaked open on its own, black and waiting. And somewhere above, I heard 3 faint knocks, patient as prayer. The door to the stairwell yawned open, just wide enough to let the dark spill through. I stared into it for a long time, waiting for something sound, movement, even the echo of breath, but nothing came. Only that faint smell of myrrh, sweet and spoiled, drifted down from the top floor. I picked up the crucifix from the floor. It was sticky, warm. When I turned it over, I saw 3 small fingerprints burned into the metal, as though someone had gripped it from the other side. Upstairs, the whisper had said. And I went. The stair creaked beneath my weight, each step sighing in protest. Halfway up, the air thickened the way it does before a storm. My ears popped. The whispering voices that had once filled the room were gone. Now there was only one sound, far more terrible, breathing. It came from the landing above me, slow, deliberate, as though the building itself had lungs. At the top of the stairs, a door stood slightly ajar. The edges of it shimmered faintly, the way hot air bends the horizon. I touched it with the tip of the crucifix. The wood pulsed under the metal. When I pushed, the door swung open without resistance. Inside was a small attic room, bare beams, a single window nailed shut. And that chair, again identical to the one below, placed in the center of the floor, facing nothing. A candle burned beside it, the flame unnaturally still. And kneeling before the chair was a man. He wore priest's robes, but they were wrong, stitched backward, buttons running down his spine instead of his chest. His head was bowed, hands clasped in front of him, murmuring in a low chant that seemed to pull the air inward with each word. Father Aurelio, wait. The figure stopped. The candle flickered once. Then, slowly, he raised his head. It wasn't Aurelio's face. It was mine, gray and slack, lips moving silently. The eyes were hollow, ringed in shadow, but unmistakably mine. I stumbled backward, heart clawing at my ribs. My reflection smiled, and in my own voice said, "You brought him home, Babel." The walls trembled. The candle flared, throwing long shadows that stretched into symbols, the same 3 circles, the same dots, repeating themselves over every beam. From beneath the floor came the familiar rhythm, knock, knock, knock. The figure stood. Every movement of its limbs was mirrored inside my bones, like my body wanted to follow. It tilted its head, studying me. "You opened the first door," it whispered. "Now the house remembers. To Zeth." The crucifix in my hand began to hum, vibrating like a tuning fork. The smell of myrrh grew overpowering, cloying, like wet flowers rotting in heat. I wanted to drop the cross, to cover my ears, but I couldn't move. The reflection raised its hand and pointed at the floor. From beneath the boards came another sound, faint scratching, as though nails were being drawn along the underside of the planks. A moment later, the candlelight dimmed, and dozens of handprints bloomed across the floor, pushing upward from beneath the wood. The thing that wore my face smiled wider. "They're awake now," it said. "The ones he buried under the words. That's two." "Who?" I choked out. "His angels," it said softly. "The ones he couldn't save. I sell." The boards cracked. Pale fingers broke through, twitching blindly, reaching for the air. Each fingertip left a smear of black ash as it scraped across the floorboards. The hands weren't climbing out, they were pressing in, as though they were pulling the room down with them. I dropped the crucifix. It hit the floor and burst into a white spark, throwing the shadows back for a heartbeat. In that flash, I saw them clearly, dozens of faces beneath the planks, wrapped in the wood, mouths moving silently in prayer. The reflection reached for me, palm outstretched. I could feel the air tighten, my lungs refusing to fill. Then, from somewhere inside the wall, 3 thunderous knocks shook the house. The reflection stopped mid-step. Its head jerked toward the door. A voice, low, hoarse, unmistakable, called from the darkness beyond the stairs. "Don't answer it. It's tinsome. Aurelio." The candle guttered. When the light returned, the reflection was gone, and the room was empty again except for the chair, now turned toward the door, waiting. Then came the final sound. From the floor below, faint but unmistakable. Knock, knock, knock. And with it, a whisper that made my blood freeze. Aurelio's voice again, only this time closer. Too late. And dealt south. When I opened my eyes, morning light slanted through the nailed-shut window, thin and colorless. The candle had burned down to a stub, frozen mid-drip. The wax had hardened into strange loops that reminded me of script. The room looked almost ordinary again. No movement, no whispering, only the faint hiss of rain against the slate roof. For a few minutes, I let myself believe it, that the night had been another fevered echo of Venice, a trick my mind played to punish itself, that the thing with my face was only a dream. I stood, stiff and sore, and found the crucifix lying where I had dropped it. It was cold again, lifeless, the metal dull. A single flake of ash clung to its edge. When I brushed it off, it dissolved like soot. Below the mark, faint scratches had appeared on the wood in the shape of 3 small arcs, fingerprints pressed from within. I pocketed it and stumbled down the stairs. Every step creaked, yet the air below felt lighter, emptied of the thick sweetness of myrrh. In the living room, the chair sat quietly where it had always been, now facing the wall once more. The crucifix's faint hum had stopped. The house smelled only of dust and cold coffee. I laughed, a dry, cracked sound that startled even me. "I'm alive," I whispered to the empty room, as if I needed to hear the words. Outside, the street was waking. I could hear traffic again, a dog barking, the living proof of day. When the landlady knocked on my door, I nearly jumped out of my skin. 3 knocks, of course. But her frail voice followed, thin through the wood. "Breakfast, monsieur." 2 haffocks. I opened the door. She stood there holding a tray coffee, bread, and a small glass jar filled with something dark. "Myrrh," she said, smiling, blind eyes turned somewhere above my shoulder. "For the priest who used to live here, he liked to burn it in the mornings." And, biting their end, "I'm not a priest," I said. "No," she murmured, "but it still follows the cloth, doesn't it?" "Well..." Before I could answer, she turned and shuffled down the corridor, her slippers whispering on the floor. I left the jar on the table, untouched. When I lifted the cup of coffee, the surface quivered, forming 3 perfect ripples that spread outward and stopped. My heart stumbled once in my chest. Coincidence, I told myself. Still, I packed a small bag, just in case. By afternoon, the house seemed almost kind. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. The air smelled of rain and warm dust. I opened the window, or rather, tried to. The nails that sealed it had rusted deep. When I pried one loose, the wood beneath split, revealing something black wedged inside the frame. I pulled it free, a strip of old parchment, stiff and brittle. On it, written in faded ink, were the words "Clausum in tribus," wary, closed in 3. A chill ran down my spine, the same pattern, always 3. I burned the parchment in the fireplace and watched it curl to ash. When the last fragment vanished, the room seemed to exhale, and for the first time since Venice, I felt an almost sacred silence, the kind that belongs to chapels before prayer. I lay down on the sofa and let the weight of exhaustion drag me under. Dreamless. Still. Until the smell woke me. It wasn't smoke. It was myrrh, sharp and alive, burning from somewhere close. I sat up. The jar on the table was open, a thin thread of fragrant smoke rising from it. The lid rested beside it, untouched. And then I saw it faint letters appearing on the window glass, written backward from the outside. "Welcome back, Father." What? My heart stopped. The chair beside the wall had turned again, now facing me directly. On its seat lay the crucifix, standing upright, balanced impossibly on one edge. For a moment, I thought I could hear the city again, but the noises outside were fading, one by one, like someone lowering the volume of the world. The last thing I heard, before the silence fell completely, was the distant ring of church bells, counting out 3 slow notes. I told myself I was imagining it, that the smell, the words, the silence were nothing more than exhaustion. But then the crucifix moved, only slightly a twitch, as if something beneath it had shifted. And underneath that sound came the faintest reply, knock, 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 so soft, so patient, I almost wished it were real. The first knock trembled through the floorboards like a pulse. I froze where I sat, coffee cup still in hand, watching the crucifix wobble on its edge. The second knock followed lower, heavier, almost from beneath the house itself. And the third came so softly that I felt it more than heard it, an echo against my spine. The cup slipped from my fingers and shattered. The dark pool that spread across the floor reflected something that shouldn't have been there, a pair of feet standing behind the chair. Bare, motionless. The air thickened, a pressure so dense it hummed. The jar of myrrh on the table hissed, its smoke rising in slow spirals that curled into the shape of letters. 3 Latin words formed above it, clausum in tribus, mines closed in 3. The floorboards beneath the chair creaked, bulging upward as though something underneath was pressing to get out. I backed toward the door, my breath shallow. "Who's there?" I asked, but my voice came out hoarse, muffled by the heavy air. A whisper answered, not from the room, but from inside the walls. "Open the 3rd door. We have..." Then the lights died. Darkness swept through the room like a tide. Only the faint ember of burning myrrh remained, casting weak shadows that moved too fast for the flame. The chair shuddered once, then slowly turned toward the window by itself. Its legs dragged across the floor, leaving 3 long scratches that smoked faintly in the dark. I stumbled toward the front door and yanked at the handle, but it refused to turn. The metal burned cold against my skin, as though frost had bloomed on the other side. The air began to hum again low at first, then rising into a steady vibration that filled the room like a living thing. Behind me, the voice of Father Aurelio began to speak. Low, calm, from everywhere and nowhere. "I told you not to bring me back, but have..." I spun around. The reflection in the window had returned. He stood outside, or perhaps within the glass, his stitched mouth moving without sound. Yet his words arrived clearly inside my head. "You finished the ritual in Venice," he said. "The gate can't close now. It follows. With some, sir." "I didn't finish anything," I whispered. His reflection smiled. "Then it will finish you. We'll have..." The boards split with a sharp crack. A black liquid seeped from beneath the chair, viscous and alive, crawling toward my feet in slow tendrils. Each tendril pulsed with its own faint heartbeat. I stumbled back as the temperature dropped again, my breath visible, drifting like mist. The crucifix on the floor began to vibrate, its edges glowing faintly red. The smell of myrrh was gone now. In its place came the dry scent of burning paper and old blood. The voice in the walls began to chant, echoing Aurelio's cadence from the vault. "De profundis clamaviat te, Domine." But this time the prayer was reversed, syllables twisted, meaning inverted. Every note seemed to pull the room closer to the floor, as if gravity had thickened. The chair lifted off the ground, only by an inch, but enough to make my stomach turn. Beneath it, the floor split open in 3 perfect lines, forming a crude triangle. From within that black opening came the faint glow of ember light, and with it the sound of breathing. Slow, patient, familiar. I clutched the crucifix and shouted the only prayer I remembered, half-forgotten Latin spilling from my tongue. "Sancte Michael Archangel, defende nos in proelio," the air screamed. Not wind sound itself, compressed into pain. The reflection in the window shattered from the inside, glass spraying across the room. Aurelio's face broke apart into smoke and ash, his stitched mouth opening in a final, silent cry. Then the entire house groaned, ancient wood twisting, walls contracting like lungs, exhaling their last breath. The whispers rose into a single word that filled every surface, every beam, every stone. "Leave. Tras." I ran. The door burst open under my shoulder. The corridor beyond was flooded with fog, dense and white, muffling the outside world into silence. I stumbled down the steps, each one bending under my weight, until I reached the street. The rain had stopped. Paris stood still. Every light in every window of Rue des Moines flickered at once 3 times and went out. I turned back. The house was collapsing inward, folding like paper burning without flame. From within the falling dark, I heard a final knock, just one, and then a breath, long and trembling, as though the building itself sighed in relief. Then it was gone. Only the faint scent of myrrh hung in the air, dissolving into the fog. I wandered until dawn, barefoot, soaked, still clutching the broken crucifix. When I finally looked at it, I saw new markings along the metal. Not scratches, letters. They spelled 3 words. 3rd door opened. Radi 1. The first light of day spilled over the Seine, and the water below shimmered faintly red. In the reflection, where my face should have been, Aurelio stood once more calm, lips stitched, holding up 3 fingers. Behind him, in the ripple of light, something vast and dark stirred. And then, for the last time, from nowhere and everywhere at once, came 3 soft knocks. Knock, 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 followed by a whisper that chilled me more than the dawn ever could. Paris was the second. Many. The police found me at sunrise, wandering barefoot along the riverbank near Pont de Clichy. They said I'd been talking to the water. When they asked for my name, I couldn't answer. The syllables caught in my throat, tangled in something older, something borrowed. They took me to the hospital for observation. The nurse who checked me in spoke gently, though her eyes betrayed unease. "You were found outside Rue des Moines," she said. "That street's been abandoned for years. Case 2 and ready." I tried to tell her about the house, the chair, the voice in the walls, but she only nodded like one humors a child. Then she smiled and said, "You're lucky. The priest who used to live there, Father Aurelio, he disappeared long ago. Some say he drowned in Venice. 2 have about card." Her words stopped my breath. I wanted to protest, to say I saw him, but she had already moved to close the curtain. As she reached for the window, her sleeve fell back, and I saw 3 perfect, circular bruises on her wrist. When she left, the room fell into silence. I lay staring at the ceiling, white and clean, until I noticed the faint pattern forming in the plaster above my bed. 3 small depressions, rhythmic, precise. Knock, knock, knock. The heart monitor beside me flickered. For a moment, the screen went black. Then words appeared, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. 3rd door opened. Inside Selfrid. The machine beeped once, twice, and then steadied again, showing my pulse as normal. But beneath the sheets, something pressed against my ankle light at first, then firmer, as though a hand were gently testing the shape of bone. I froze. The smell of myrrh rose through the sterile air, sickly and sweet. A whisper slid from beneath the bed. Aurelio's voice. Tired, tender, almost kind. 2 left, 2 fired. The lights dimmed. The knocking began again, this time from the walls of the hospital, spreading outward, echoing down unseen corridors. And somewhere far below, in the basement, another voice answered with 3 slower knocks, like a heartbeat responding in perfect rhythm. The house on Rue des Moines was gone. but something else had moved in. Story 3. The Church Without a Cross. The train to Yorkshire felt too quiet for a country famous for its wind. Outside the window, green hills rolled endlessly beneath a sky, the color of wet slate. Every so often, the reflection of my own face would flicker against the glass, and behind it, just for a breath, I thought I saw another. Aurelio's. Mouth still sewn, eyes still calm. The hospital in Paris had called it trauma-induced visions. Too 5 I had self. They said a change of air might help. The clinic arranged a small cottage for me near an old abbey on the edge of the moors, a ruin half swallowed by fog, called St. Harlow's. When I arrived, the caretaker handed me the keys and warned me not to walk there after dusk. He said the church had no cross. It was torn down centuries ago. During a storm, no one remembered, but everyone feared. Some nights, he added, the wind still rang through the empty bell tower, counting time that no longer exists. That night, as I unpacked, I found the crucifix again, the one from Venice. Its metal was cracked clean down the middle, yet when I touched it, it was warm. And somewhere across the moor, faint and distant, 3 knocks rolled through the mist. The moors breathed differently at night. It wasn't wind, it was slower, heavier, as though the earth itself exhaled through the grass. When I opened the window of the cottage, I could see the black silhouette of St. Harlow's Abbey across the field. Its roof gone, its bell tower cleaved in half, like a jaw broken mid-prayer. The caretaker had said no one went there, but the faint light of a candle flickered in the upper window, swaying with a rhythm too precise to be the wind. 3 blinks, pause, 3 again. My hand tightened around the cracked crucifix in my pocket. I told myself it was a shepherd, or a trespasser, or anything normal. Yet the smell of myrrh drifted through the night air again, thin, impossible, familiar. That same sweetness that had haunted Venice and Paris. I couldn't sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I heard the faint echo of 3 knocks, coming not from the door, but from inside the walls. A hollow, patient rhythm, like something testing the edges of wood. At 2:03 a.m., I gave up pretending. I dressed, took the lantern, and stepped out into the mist. The field was sodden, mud pulling at my boots, the air so cold it burned. Yet the abbey seemed closer than it should have been, its broken archway taller, its shadows moving even when the fog was still. The candlelight in the window had vanished, but the smell of myrrh grew stronger with every step. When I reached the iron gate, it swung open on its own. The sound wasn't a creak, it was a knock, once, deep and low, as if the building were answering. Inside, the nave stretched wide and empty. No pews, no altar, just black stone slick with moisture. Only one thing remained upright, a statue of an angel, head bowed, wings eroded by centuries of rain. Its face was smooth, featureless, like marble left unfinished. I walked closer. Something about its stance was wrong. The arms were raised not in blessing, but in warning. And where the cross should have been on the wall behind it, there was only a gaping void, blacker than any shadow. The wind picked up, whispering through the broken rafters, shaping sounds almost like speech. I turned to leave. That was when I heard it, a bell. Not from the tower, but below the floorboards, muffled and deep. It rang 3 times, slow and deliberate, the vibrations crawling up through my legs into my chest. When it stopped, a whisper followed, faint, masculine, and close enough to brush my ear. "You've opened 2? This is the 3rd. Question." I spun around, lantern shaking, but the church was empty. Only the angel remained, head tilted slightly upward now, as though listening. And from somewhere deep within the earth below, I heard the first breath of something beginning to wake. The sound began as a hum, faint, subterranean, pulsing through the stone like a heartbeat too big for the earth to hold. Each vibration sent dust spilling from the arches, tiny white motes spiraling through the lantern light. The angel statue loomed before me, wings cracked, head bowed no longer. It was watching me now, its eyeless face angled toward my trembling lantern. The bell underneath the floor rang again. Once, twice, thrice. The same rhythm, always 3. The air thickened, trembling with something that wasn't quite wind. I could feel it brushing my ears, whispering in syllables too slow to belong to a human throat. When I took a step back, the sound followed, rising, matching my breath, until I couldn't tell whether it came from inside or outside my body. Then I heard a voice I knew. Low, soft, patient. "Father Aurelio, do you remember, child?" it murmured, "why the cross was taken down?" Wait. The voice came from everywhere: walls, stone, air, and yet it sounded close enough that I could feel its warmth against my cheek. "I told them not to build it," it said. "No cross should stand over a door that leads down. No tames." The ground shivered. I stumbled, the lantern slipping from my hand and rolling across the floor. Its flame flickered sideways, revealing something I hadn't seen before. Faint carvings across the tiles, forming a spiral that led toward the place where the altar should have been. Each segment was marked with 3 dots. I followed the light, breath shallow. The spiral ended at a small iron ring set into the floor. When I touched it, the stone was warm. I shouldn't have, but my fingers closed around the ring and pulled. The slab lifted with a hiss of air, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. At the top step, etched into the stone, were 3 words in Latin: tertium apparitur ostium, resec. The 3rd door opens. From below came the faint clatter of chains, and then the breathing. Not human, not animal. It was too slow, too measured, like something ancient rehearsing life after centuries of silence. Aurelio's voice returned, now sharper, nearer. "You're finishing what I couldn't. 1 so. I didn't mean to," I whispered. "I didn't open anything. 10. The whisper turned to a sigh. "You answered," it said. "That was enough." As at his end, the angel statue groaned behind me. Stone grated against stone as its head tilted back, mouth cracking open down the center. From that fissure poured a sound like choral music, dozens of voices layered upon one another, rising in perfect harmony, each note reversing the next. The hymn filled the nave, pressing against my skull until I thought my bones would split. The staircase below glowed faintly red. Light or blood seeped upward, hurling around the angel's feet. The smell of myrrh thickened, sweet and nauseating, coating the inside of my throat. I stumbled backward, shielding my eyes. But then the voices changed. They weren't singing anymore. They were calling names. Names I knew. The patients from Paris, the undertaker in Venice, and my own. Each syllable was precise, deliberate, like a knife being sharpened against glass. When my name was spoken, the bell below the floor rang once, a deep, hollow sound that made the air shiver. Something began to climb the stairs. I didn't see it. Not at first, only the shadow it cast along the wall, tall and thin, crowned with something like wings that moved too slowly. Each step it took ended with a knockwood, stone, flesh, impossible to tell which. I backed away until I hit the cold wall of the nave. The angel statue turned its empty gaze toward the stairs, and in a voice not its own whispered, "Run." But I couldn't move. My legs refused to obey. The light from the staircase flared, blinding, and from within that crimson glow, a hand emerged, pale, long-fingered, reaching for me. As it touched the edge of the floor, the entire church groaned, the bell tower above letting out a single, tortured toll. And through the ringing, I heard Aurelio again, his voice breaking now. Once it stands without a cross, it doesn't kneel to anyone. Resher. The ground split open, and something began to rise. The red light from the stairwell pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the floor. With each pulse, the air thickened until it seemed to cling to my skin. The angel statue's cracked mouth gaped wider, the sound inside it rising in broken chords, the echo of hymns sung backward through stone. When the first shadowed hand reached the top of the stairs, the hymn stopped. Only the breathing remained. It was a slow inhale, as if the church itself was drawing me closer. Then came the exhale, a long sigh that swept through the nave, extinguishing the lantern where it had rolled. The red glow below dimmed, revealing something moving on the steps. A figure cloaked in black, taller than any man, its head brushing the low ceiling. Each step it took ended with the soft tap of bone against stone. I could not run. My body had gone hollow, filled only with the sound of my pulse. The figure reached the final step and paused. It raised its head. Where a face should have been was a mass of smooth skin, stitched into a grin too wide to be human. Across its chest, something shimmered, the torn fragment of a priest's stole, embroidered with the name Aurelio. I staggered back, shaking my head. "No, you're not him. We are flecked and..." The thing tilted slightly, as if studying me. When it spoke, its voice was two layered tones, Aurelio's and mine, perfectly aligned. "You opened the third door. Welsum." "I didn't." And Quetter. My voice cracked, echoing helplessly in the ruined nave. The air trembled around the creature's outline, its body shifting like heat above a flame. It stepped onto the stone floor, and the smell of myrrh bloomed again stronger, rancid now, like sweet rot. The angel statue groaned, stone bending where it stood. Its head twisted toward me, and for a single impossible moment, light flickered inside its hollow eyes, not holy light, but reflection, like fire seen through water. The statue raised one broken arm and pointed at the creature. Then its hand fell off, shattering against the floor. The figure in the robe stopped inches from me. Its stitched grin curved upward. It lifted its hand not to strike, but to touch. When its fingers brushed my chest, I felt no pressure, only heat, like breath exhaled directly into my heart. Images burst through my head. The vault in Venice, the apartment in Paris, the hospital lights blinking. Third door opened. Each memory pulsed in rhythm with the thing's hand. Aurelio's voice filled the space between my thoughts. "Do you know what the doors are?" it whispered. "They were not meant for demons. They were meant for us. Taking." Behind it, the open stairway shuddered, widening. A wind rose from below, carrying fragments of chanting, hundreds of voices, reciting fragments of prayer, collapsing into static. The red light brightened, forming a circle at the creature's feet. 3 sigils burned into the stone, forming a triangle that locked around us. I dropped to my knees, clutching the cracked crucifix. Its surface had grown hot, blistering my palm. Smoke rose where it touched my skin. The creature leaned down. Its face hovered inches from mine, the stitched grin stretching with each breath. "I tried to close them," it said softly. But something always answered, and Friau. I forced the words through clenched teeth. "What happens when all 3 open? Ard." Its grin widened until the threads began to tear, splitting the flesh down to where the throat should have been. From that opening came a sound that wasn't speech, a low, rising knock, deep as thunder trapped beneath the sea. Each strike rattled the glassless windows, shaking loose fragments of stone dust that fell around us like snow. The angel statue's head exploded, showering the nave in shards. Through the hole in the roof above, the clouds swirled unnaturally, a spiral forming in their center. Lightning flashed without thunder, illuminating the creature's face, and in that instant, I saw my own eyes staring back from behind the stitches. "No," I whispered. It reached for me again, the movement slow, inevitable. The crucifix pulsed once in my hand, a heartbeat that wasn't mine. And somewhere deep beneath the church, something answered. 3 enormous knocks shook the ground, each louder than the last. The red light surged, blinding, and the floor gave way. I fell down through darkness, through whispers, through the echo of Aurelio's voice, calling my name. When I hit the ground, everything was silent again. Only the faint ringing of the bell tower remained 3 slow tolls, fading into nothing. I opened my eyes to see the figure above me, framed in the broken stairwell, its stitched mouth finally splitting apart. It spoke with my own voice. "Now you keep the gate. Way." Then it stepped backward into the light, leaving me in the hollow beneath St. Harlow's. I woke to the sound of dripping water. Cold stone pressed against my cheek, and the air was thick with the smell of earth and wet limestone. For a moment, I thought I was back in the vault beneath Venice, the same chill, the same echo of something breathing in rhythm with mine. But when I sat up, I realized I was beneath St. Harlow's Abbey. A narrow tunnel stretched before me, walls lined with fragments of broken headstones and rotted wood. My lantern was gone, yet the darkness wasn't complete. A faint light pulsed from deeper within the passage, as if the walls themselves remembered fire. I touched my chest. The crucifix was still there, warm against my skin, the metal cracked down the middle. My first thought was escape. The staircase above had collapsed, sealing me in. So I walked. Each step echoed 3 times, as though something invisible followed half a breath behind. The tunnel curved, leading me into a chamber no larger than a chapel. Stone benches lined the walls, and at the center stood an altar carved from black basalt. The surface was polished, reflective. When I leaned closer, I saw that it wasn't reflection, it was movement. Faces, pale and shifting, drifted just beneath the surface, lips moving in silent prayer. I staggered back, bile burning my throat. That was when I saw it on the far wall, an engraving of a cross. Crude, old, its arms uneven, but it was there. The first and only cross in the church without a cross. Relief hit me so hard my knees gave out. I crawled toward it, desperate for something holy, after weeks of nothing but whispers. The moment my fingers brushed the stone, the warmth vanished. The wall was cold, impossibly cold. And the shape I'd taken for a cross wasn't carved into the stone. It was carved out of it, a hollow in the exact shape of a crucifix, as though someone had ripped it free. I pulled my hand away, heart thudding. Something inside the cavity moved. A faint scraping, the sound of bone dragging across rock. Then, slowly, a whisper. "Do you see it now? Cotillion Stanter," Aurelio's voice. I turned. He stood in the corner, half lit by the weak glow from the altar. His robe was torn, the blackened stole hanging loosely from his shoulders. The stitches across his mouth were gone, leaving a dark line that never quite closed when he spoke. "You opened it," he said softly. "The third door. The church was never meant to stand, it was meant to mark. Thingstander." "Mark what?" I rasped. He smiled, a weary, human smile this time. "The place where God stopped listening, and..." Something inside the hollow cross stirred again, a slow knock, muffled, almost polite. Then another, then a third. Each one softer, closer. The stone began to sweat, thin rivulets running down its surface. Aurelio stepped forward. His eyes were calm, kind even. "It's not coming for you," he said. "It's coming through you. Rounder." I shook my head. "I don't understand." He reached into his robe and withdrew something small, a piece of parchment, folded and sealed with wax. He pressed it into my hand. "When it speaks," he whispered, "don't answer this time." As the light in the chamber dimmed, the whispers from the altar grew louder, clearer, hundreds of voices blending into a single tone. The faces beneath the stone began to rise, pressing against the surface until it bowed outward like water ready to burst. I backed away, clutching the parchment. "Father," I shouted. But Aurelio was already fading, his body dissolving into ash that drifted toward the altar. His last words were almost gentle. "False relief is still relief. Take it." And sighed. The glow died. The whispers stopped. For the first time since Venice, there was silence. I sat there for hours, maybe days, it's hard to tell, underground, waiting for the next sound, the next sign. None came. When I finally climbed back toward the faint shaft of daylight that had appeared through the broken ceiling, I thought maybe, finally, it was done. No voices, no knocks, no smell of myrrh, only air, cold, wet, real. I hauled myself through the rubble and into the open ruins above. The sky was clear. Birds circled the tower. For the first time, the world looked alive again. I almost smiled. And then, faintly, from behind me, through the hole I'd just crawled out of, came the sound of something dragging itself up the stairs. Slow, steady. And between each scrape, knock, knock, knock. I didn't turn. Not yet. Because for one precious second, I wanted the lie to last. The first knock after that silence wasn't loud. It was soft, deliberate, the kind of sound you'd make if you didn't want to wake someone, but wanted them to know you were there. The second came closer, vibrating through the stone under my palms. And the third, that one came from the air itself, as though the sound had learned to move without a surface. I turned, slowly, and saw a pale hand grip the edge of the hole I'd climbed through. The fingers were long, the skin stretched thin, translucent as wax. They flexed once, then tightened. "Father," I whispered. The voice that answered was not Aurelio's. It was mine. "You left me down there, ways hell-bent." The hand pulled harder, and a face followed my face, streaked with mud and blood, eyes empty but knowing. It smiled the way you smile when you remember a secret no one else does. "I kept the gate for you," it said. "Now it's your turn again." Disparity. I stumbled back, tripping over the stones, the crucifix slipping from my grasp. It landed between us, splitting in half where the crack had been. The two pieces hit the earth with a sound that wasn't metal. It was a knock. The ground beneath the ruins pulsed red. Every stone of St. Harlow's trembled, dust rising in slow spirals like breath. The air filled with the smell of myrrh again, thick, choking, sweet as rot. The thing that wore my face began to climb out. Its limbs bent wrong. Each motion produced a faint ringing, like the toll of a small bell. It reached the surface and stood, head tilted, smiling that same empty smile. "You finished the first door," it said. Then the second, way. It took a step forward. "Now the third is open, but the fourth waits above." "Nay, there are only three," I said. "Aurelio told me." It laughed softly, and the sound came from everywhere, echoing through the shattered abbey walls. "He told you what he remembered, not what he forgot." Every tensely. The ground split with a sharp crack. The hollow beneath the ruins widened, exposing the spiral of carvings I'd seen earlier. 3 circles, each burning faintly red, now joined by a fourth, freshly carved and pulsing. The whispering started again, thousands of voices murmuring prayers and curses together, until the air itself became language. The statue of the angel, or what was left of it, began to move. The wings unfolded from its broken back, made not of stone but shadow vast and slow, stretching into the mist like ink dispersing in water. Its head, faceless and ruined, turned toward me. It opened its mouth. From that mouth came Aurelio's voice, ragged and distant. "Run." Well, the creature in my shape turned sharply toward the angel. Too late, it hissed. Then it raised its hand, palm outward, and the ground responded. The stones erupted upward in lines, forming what looked like ribs around us, a cage, closing in. I ran, not toward the road, not toward the village, but across the moor, toward the black horizon where the fog swallowed everything. Behind me, the abbey screamed not with wind or stone, but with the sound of thousands of knocks merging into one continuous roar. Each strike seemed to push the world a little further out of alignment, bending light, stretching sound. I didn't look back until I reached the ridge. St. Harlow's was collapsing inward, vanishing into a crater of red light. The creature that wore my face stood at its edge, still watching me. Then, with deliberate calm, it raised its hand 3 fingers up, like a priest's blessing. The ground beneath it cracked open, and it sank into the light. The air went silent. completely silent. I fell to my knees. The crucifix halves were still in my pocket, each one warm and vibrating softly, beating in time with my heart. The red glow faded, swallowed by the fog. And for the first time in months, I couldn't smell myrrh. Only the clean scent of rain. I thought, maybe, just maybe, it was over. I walked back to the cottage at dawn. The caretaker's truck was gone. The fields were empty. The house looked smaller, older, as though it had been abandoned for decades. I stepped inside, soaked and shaking. On the table lay an envelope, yellowed, unmarked. The wax seal was the same deep crimson as the symbols beneath the abbey. I hesitated, then broke it. Inside was a single scrap of parchment, the one Aurelio had given me underground. Only now the writing was visible, drawn in faint red ink. Quarta porta parata est. That. The fourth door is ready. The floorboards beneath my feet creaked. Once, twice, thrice. And from the fireplace, dead, old, untouched, came a sound like a long, slow breath. A voice whispered from the ashes, low and kind, almost loving. Yorkshire was the third way. Then, as the wind rose outside and the candle flames leaned inward toward me, I heard something new, something that had never happened before. A fourth knock. Soft. Curious. Waiting. I whispered, barely breathing. Who's there? Kenner. The voice that answered was mine. All that's left. Well sighed. Morning came in silence. The moors were veiled in mist, thick enough to erase the horizon. Even the birds refused to sing. I sat at the cottage table, staring at the parchment that now bled faintly through the fibers. The words, Quarta porta parata est, shimmering like something alive. The fourth door is ready. I told myself to leave. To find a car, a road, a train, anything that could carry me far from St. Harlow's. But the air in the room had weight again, that same syrupy sweetness of myrrh, faint but unmistakable. It drifted from the fireplace. And behind it, under the crackle of settling ash, came the smallest sound in the world. Knock. I froze. No wind, no shifting wood. Just one quiet, deliberate knock from inside the chimney. The candle on the mantel quivered. Then came the second knock, lighter this time, almost playful. And finally the third soft, measured, familiar. The rhythm that had followed me across countries and graves. I backed away slowly, my hand tightening around the broken crucifix halves in my pocket. The parchment on the table lifted slightly, as though exhaling. A whisper rose from beneath it, Aurelio's voice again, almost a sigh. It was never about doors. It was about you. Ink stain. The window fogged over. 3 small fingerprints appeared in the condensation. Then a fourth. The parchment burst into flame without heat, curling inward on itself. When it turned to ash, the last line of Latin remained burned into the table. Porta quarta, non apparitur, nascitur, what he self. The fourth door does not open. It is born. I understood too late. The knocking wasn't trying to get in. It had been learning the rhythm of my heart. A pattern. A key. As the realization struck, the candle died. The room fell dark, but the smell of myrrh deepened until it was almost suffocating. Then, faintly, from inside my chest. Knock, knock, knock. Not echo. Not hallucination. Answer. When I looked into the black window, my reflection smiled, calm, quiet, mouth stitched in place. And behind that reflection, something moved, larger, patient, breathing in sync with mine. The fourth door had never been in Venice, nor in Paris, nor under St. Harlow's. It had been waiting beneath my ribs all along. To be continued in Story 4. The Gate Beneath the Abbey, Bavaria, Germany, and Frechter. I left England the morning the fourth knock came from inside my chest. The doctor at the port said it was arrhythmia. I said nothing. How could I tell him that each beat of my heart now answered a rhythm that wasn't mine? Bavaria felt colder than I remembered. The air in the mountains had weight, an old kind of silence that held its breath even when the wind passed through the pines. The driver who took me to the abbey spoke little English. He only said one thing. Weiss, Sankt Gertrude, geschlossen, closed, waste staying. But when I showed him the letter, a faded invitation sealed in red wax and signed Aurelio, he crossed himself and drove faster. The abbey sat carved into the mountainside, its bell tower swallowed by mist, its gates chained but half open. On the stone arch above the entrance was a single Latin inscription. Quis custodiet ostium is for count. Who guards the door? Inside, the air smelled of old paper and faintly myrrh. The echo of my footsteps followed like a second heartbeat. And from deep below the floor, a sound rose that I had been dreading and craving in equal measure. Knock, knock, knock. The sound lingered long after it ended, as though the abbey itself kept replaying it for memory's sake. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate, carried upward through the stone like breath rising from a sleeping creature. I stood in the nave, staring down at the cracked tiles. There was no one here. No footsteps, no flicker of candlelight, no smell of dust or rot, only that faint, impossible sweetness of myrrh that had haunted every place I'd run to. It filled the air like invisible incense, settling in the back of my throat. I called out once, voice echoing too far. Father Aurelio, what is that? The name sounded small in the cold. It died without answer. Then something moved, not sound, but temperature. The air shifted behind me, a pocket of warmth brushing my neck, the kind that means someone has stepped close enough to share a breath. I turned quickly. Empty. Only a row of wooden pews, tilted and half-eaten by time. At their end stood a stairwell leading down, its entrance cordoned with iron chain. A wooden sign hung above it, carved in German so faint I could barely read. Kein Gebet hinter der dritten Tür. To Sellens came. No prayer beyond the third door. My pulse stuttered once. That phrase again, third door. But I had already opened it, hadn't I? A whisper rose from below. Not language, a rhythm. 3 heartbeats. Then silence again. I should have left right then. But something in that darkness pulled not with menace, but with recognition, the way a mirror beckons when you pass it in dim light. I moved closer. The chain was cold to the touch, yet unfastened. It fell away the moment I brushed it. A faint current of warm air rose from the stairwell, carrying a metallic scent beneath the myrrh. I lit my lantern. The flame bent immediately toward the depths. It was as if the dark itself was inhaling. The first few steps were carved smooth, worn by centuries of monks. The walls narrowed, damp, whispering with the sound of dripping water. Then, halfway down, I noticed something odd. Each stone block bore an engraving. 3 small circles, joined by a line. The same mark that had followed me since Venice. By the time I reached the landing, the smell of myrrh had changed. No longer sweet, now acrid, like burned resin. And over it, a new scent, candle wax, fresh. Someone had been here. I found the first candle at the bottom of the stairs. Still warm, still burning. Beside it, written in Latin across the wall, was a phrase scrawled in hurried strokes. Quartum ostium clausum est. And, with working from self, the 4th door is closed. But beneath it, carved deeper, fresher, still glistening in the lantern light, for now, as a master. Then, from somewhere beyond the corridor, came the sound I had feared most. Not 3 knocks, but 4. Each one slower than the last, as if the 4th wanted me to hear the difference. And then Aurelio's voice, quiet, patient, impossibly near. Don't run this time. And fire. The 4th knock still echoed when I raised the lantern. It came from deeper within the corridor, from somewhere past the bend where the light refused to go. The air down there was warmer, now wet, heavy, almost breathing. Each inhale drew the flame toward the dark, and with every exhale, the lantern dimmed a little more. I took 1 step forward. The sound answered me immediately. Tap, 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 tap. 4 knocks this time, in perfect mimicry of my heartbeat. The rhythm was calm, patient, almost reassuring, as if whatever was waiting ahead already knew there was no need to hurry. The corridor curved sharply left, then opened into a narrow chamber. The walls glistened with condensation, but underneath the moisture were carvings, lines of Latin prayers etched so deeply that blood had once filled them for ink. When the lantern light hit the far wall, I saw the outline of an iron door built directly into the mountain. It had no handle, only 4 perfect depressions arranged like the points of a cross. Aurelio's voice came from the dark behind me, quiet and exhausted. You're early. Why? I turned. He stood halfway down the steps, robe heavy with moisture, face pale and translucent, the stitches along his mouth, faint scars now. For the first time, he looked afraid. What is this place? I whispered. He looked past me, toward the iron door. The heart of Sankt Gertrude, the monks built above it, thinking they could pray the gate back to sleep. Well, he stepped closer, but every door needs a keeper. Way. I swallowed hard. Is that why you called me here? Reddings come. His answer was a whisper that trembled with guilt. I didn't call you. You answered. As the 4th knock came again, loud enough to rattle the door. Dust fell from the ceiling. The prayers on the walls shuddered as if spoken aloud. Aurelio flinched. It's waking. We were never meant to reach this one. To Ractas. The ground pulsed beneath us, a single, slow heartbeat. My lantern flickered, and for an instant, I saw movement across the iron door. Something pressed against it from the other side, pushing outward. A faint outline of a hand, then another, both leaving trails of black soot as they slid across the metal. Aurelio gripped my shoulders, fingers trembling. Listen to me. Every door is an echo of the one before it. Venice was death. Paris was reflection. Yorkshire was faith. But this, he paused, eyes glinting with something like awe and dread. This one breathes? Well, the next sound wasn't a knock. It was a gasp, wet, human, desperate. The door swelled outward, the metal flexing as though lungs strained behind it. From the cracks seeped a dull red light, pulsing in time with the rhythm inside my chest. Aurelio stepped back, shaking his head. It's using you now. Every beat, every word, it's building the key. And 5 wetter. I staggered, clutching my chest. The knocks weren't coming from the door anymore. They were inside me, vibrating through my ribs. 4 slow thuds that didn't belong to my heart. The iron depressions on the door began to glow faintly, and I realized what they were: handprints. 4. Waiting to be filled. Aurelio's expression collapsed into something between pity and horror. It needs your touch to open. That's why it let you live. How is like them? The whispering began again, soft, layered, countless voices overlapping, speaking in every language and none. The myrrh in the air thickened until I could taste it, sweet and burning. The iron door pulsed once more. This time, it whispered back. Not words. A single sound. A heartbeat. And in its rhythm, I heard my name. Aurelio shouted something in Latin, his voice sharp and terrified. He slammed his palm against my chest, and the pulse stopped for half a second. I gasped, falling to my knees, and when I looked up, he was gone. Only the echo of his prayer remained, circling the chamber like smoke. The red glow dimmed. The door's surface cooled. The 4 handprints faded back into shadow. But beneath it all, faint and patient, a new rhythm began. 5 knocks this time. Slow, certain, as if something behind the door had just learned to count. For a long while, I couldn't move. The chamber held its breath, and so did I. The only sound was the 5th knock, echoing through the iron and my bones alike. It came from nowhere specific above, below, within, and every pulse felt like a heartbeat misplaced. I lifted the lantern again. The flame quivered, shrinking to the size of a pin, as if afraid of what it might reveal. Then it flared back to life, brighter than before, and for the first time, I saw what surrounded the door. Bodies, dozens of them, sealed upright into the stone walls, monks, their faces preserved by centuries of dry air. Each one had their hands pressed forward, palms open, as though they'd been trying to hold the door closed. Their eyes were gone, their mouths sewn shut with the same black thread that had once bound Aurelio's. Yet each body leaned just slightly toward me, their spines curved in supplication. The smell of myrrh thickened until it felt like syrup in my lungs. I staggered backward, hitting the cold edge of the altar. The carvings beneath my hand pulsed faintly, warm to the touch. Then another knock. This time closer, sharper. The lantern's flame leaned toward the iron door as if drawn by breath. Something behind it exhaled, slow and deep, and the frost on the metal melted in trails like tears. A voice followed, not a whisper this time. It was calm, even kind. Do you want it to stop? Haven't tamed. It was my own voice. Perfect in tone, but softened, almost pleading. I froze. I don't understand, I managed. The voice sighed, echoing through the corridor. You've been running from a sound that only exists because you still breathe. Let me take it, and the silence will be complete. Eh? The fifth knock came again, reverberating up through the floor. This time, I saw the handprints glow on the iron, 4 bright depressions, waiting. The fifth flickered faintly in the center, smaller, trembling like an unfinished thought. My ribs began to ache. The rhythm inside my chest faltered, then matched the knocking exactly. 4 beats. A pause. Then a fifth, heavier, deeper. Something was trying to borrow my pulse. I pressed my palm over my heart, but the skin there moved slowly, deliberately, like something pressing back from underneath. The air grew warmer. The whispering from the walls returned, but this time the monks' stitched mouths opened, threads snapping one by one. Their lips moved soundlessly, each syllable forming a word I couldn't hear, but understood all the same. Open. The iron door groaned. The 4 outer handprints flared bright red. Steam hissed from the seams as the stone around it began to crack. A thin fissure spread across the center, long, vertical, like a pupil dilating in the dark. I stumbled forward despite myself. The pull was magnetic, ancient, patient. My hands trembled inches above the glowing metal. When the heat touched my skin, I saw brief flashes behind my eyes. Venice, the corpse, rising from its coffin. Paris, the mirror, whispering my name. Yorkshire, the angel without a face. And now, this, the final door, breathing in time with me. The voice returned, still gentle, still mine. You can't keep the gate closed forever. Let me through. Let me finish. There. The monks began to hum, their throats producing a sound like stone grinding on bone. The vibration filled the chamber, shaking the lantern out of my hand. Its flame died mid-fall, and the red light from the door became the only illumination. Something moved inside the fissure. Not a hand this time, an eye. Dark, liquid, endless. It blinked once, and the entire room inhaled. I screamed without meaning to. My voice came back to me, multiplied 10-fold, 20-fold, echoing from every mouth in the wall. Each echo ended with a knock. Then another, and another, until there were 6. The fissure widened. A wave of heat swept through, not fire but breath, ancient, heavy with the scent of blood and myrrh. The eye vanished. In its place, a hand pressed through the gap, slick and pale, fingers tipped with light. The voice whispered one last time, right against my ear now, so close I could feel the warmth of its words. You already opened it when you said my name. When serpent. I turned, and behind me, standing where Aurelio had vanished, was myself. Whole, calm. No shadow, no wound, no fear. He smiled. Now trade places. Well throughway. The door thundered, shaking the mountain. All the candles in the abbey above went out at once. And the 5th knock, the one that shouldn't exist, sounded like the world itself closing its eyes. When I woke, there was sunlight. Real sunlight, pale, fragile, pouring through a high window I didn't remember seeing before. For a long time, I didn't move. The cold stone beneath me was still damp, but the red glow was gone. No humming, no knocking, no breath that wasn't mine. The air smelled of moss and earth, not myrrh. I pressed my palm to my chest. My heartbeat was steady again, 4 beats, then silence. no fifth. I lay there, gasping quietly like someone who's surfaced after drowning. Maybe I had imagined it all, the door, the voices, Aurelio's hollow face. Maybe I had simply fainted in the tunnel and dreamt the rest. The chamber around me was empty now. The bodies in the walls were gone, the prayers scrubbed clean from the stone. The iron door stood ajar, just a crack, and beyond it was only darkness and the faint smell of cold metal. The air that came through was ordinary air. It was over. I stood and climbed back toward the surface. Each step echoed with the soft rasp of stone, the normal rhythm of movement, not the knock that had followed me for months. When I reached the nave, daylight spilled across the floor in long, dusty beams. Pigeons cooed in the rafters. The abbey was quiet, in the way empty buildings are indifferent, peaceful. For the first time since Venice, I allowed myself to believe in the possibility of peace. I found a broken bench near the entrance and sat. The wood creaked, but only once. No pattern, no reply, just stillness. Outside, the mist over the mountains had lifted. Bavaria looked almost alive again, pines whispering, bells chiming faintly from the village below. I smiled, almost laughed. I was free. At the edge of the bench, something caught the light. Aurelio's crucifix, or what was left of it, lay half buried in dust. The split down its center had widened, but the two halves still fit together like puzzle pieces. I picked them up, pressing them gently until the crack sealed. The metal pulsed once, faintly warm, as though breathing. It startled me, but I told myself it was only the sun. I placed it back on the bench and turned toward the doorway. Outside, the wind carried the smell of pine and soil. No trace of incense. No myrrh. At the threshold, I stopped and looked back one last time. The abbey was beautiful in ruined stone arches framing the sky, ivy curling like veins. And on the far wall, where the altar had once stood, I saw a faint outline not carved, just a discoloration. A cross, perfect and whole. I almost laughed again. After all this time, the church without a cross had finally earned one. When I stepped outside, the sun hit my face. It felt like absolution. I walked down the path, breathing deeply, memorizing the weight of the air, the taste of clean wind. Every step took me farther from the echo of the underground, farther from Aurelio, farther from the knocks. Halfway down the slope, I heard a voice, soft, behind me. Wait, Tace. I turned instinctively. No one. Only the abbey, distant now, quiet. The breeze rose, carrying a faint sound, wood shifting, metal sighing from deep within the mountain. Then silence again. Just the rustle of pine and the faint chime of the village bells. I kept walking. By the time I reached the road, the sense of dread had faded into exhaustion. A passing truck stopped. The driver offered a ride to town. He spoke no English, only smiled and pointed at my hands. They were covered in soot, black dust under every nail, the same as the residue on the crucifix. I wiped them against my trousers, trying not to think about it. When the truck pulled away, I looked back through the rear window one last time. The abbey had vanished behind the trees. The sunlight gleamed on the mountain like a promise. And for the first time in months, I could hear only one heartbeat, my own. But just as I closed my eyes, letting the hum of the engine lull me toward sleep. I felt a pulse that wasn't mine. Not in my chest this time. In my pocket. 4 slow beats. A pause. And then, faint and patient knock. The driver turned his head slightly, as if hearing it too. He crossed himself once, then muttered a word I almost recognized. Fünfte. Way. The 5th. The driver didn't speak again after that. He kept his eyes fixed on the road, knuckles white against the wheel. The truck climbed through the forest like it was moving through a dream, too slow, too quiet, the engine barely humming. Every few seconds, he'd glance into the rearview mirror, not at me, but behind me. Outside, the trees blurred into black ribs against a colorless sky. Mist coiled between the branches, folding in on itself like smoke, and somewhere deep within that fog came the dull, rhythmic thud of wood against wood. 4 knocks. Then a pause. Then a 5th. Each one slower, heavier, closer. I pressed a hand to my pocket. The crucifix pieces trembled against my palm, radiating faint heat. The metal pulsed in time with the knocking, like it was breathing with it. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. The driver didn't look at me. His mouth moved soundlessly at first, then he murmured something in German. "Es folgt dir. Reckon. It follows you." The mist outside thickened until I could no longer see the road. The engine stuttered, coughed, then died completely. Silence filled the cab like water. He turned to me then, eyes wide, trembling. "You should go," he said. He opened his door and stepped out into the fog. I reached for him, but his outline dissolved before I could speak, swallowed whole by the gray. The air inside the truck changed. Heavier. Sweeter. That smell myrrh, warm and wet, like flowers rotting under candle wax. I gripped the door handle and stepped into the mist. The forest around me was gone. In its place stood an empty field of snow, stretching endlessly in every direction. No road. No truck. Just the faint shape of the Abbey Tower, miles away, faintly glowing red beneath the mountain. And the sound again. Knock, 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 knock. Each strike vibrated through the air, visible now ripples bending the mist like heat above fire. With every pulse, the snow beneath my feet darkened, softening into something that wasn't quite earth. I knelt. It wasn't snow at all. It was ash. The horizon trembled. Then the ground opened. A single fissure cut through the ash, wide enough to swallow light. From its depths came a glow like molten glass and a whisper, deep and layered, thousands of voices breathing through one mouth. "You brought it this far," it said. "Finish what he started. Wide so, friend." A shape began to rise from the fissure, thin, white arms reaching upward, grasping for purchase. They weren't human. Too long, too fluid. And yet, one of them held something familiar. The crucifix. Whole again. I took a step back. The 5th knock rolled through the air, shaking the ground. Then a 6th. Slower. Lower. The sound was no longer asking. It was calling. The fissure widened. From within it, I saw the outline of a figure climbing upward, face hidden in shadow, robes soaked black with something darker than blood. It moved like a man remembering how to stand. When it straightened, I recognized the torn stole around its neck, Aurelio's. His eyes met mine, empty but aware. He raised one trembling hand. "Stop," I said. "It's over, friend." He smiled faintly. "No," he whispered. "You are, well." He pressed his hand to his own chest, and I felt it a weight blooming beneath my ribs, expanding outward like a second heartbeat. It spread through me, hot and slow, until every breath came with an echo, every pulse another knock. 4 beats, then 5, then 6. The crucifix in his hand flared white hot, blinding. The ground beneath me broke open. I fell. For a moment, there was nothing but light and wind. Then stone beneath me again, cold, familiar, endless. I was back in the chamber under Sankt Gertrude. The iron door stood wide open now, and the space beyond it pulsed like a living throat. Inside, something vast moved, not form, not flesh, but intention. Aurelio stood beside me, or the thing wearing him did. His voice was calm again. It wanted out. I told it no. It listened, so it made another way. "Rax, through me," I said. He nodded. The 5th knock thundered, shaking the walls. Cracks spidered through the ceiling. "I kept the gate as long as I could," he whispered. "Now it's yours." And for 8. He stepped back toward the opening. His outline fractured, breaking into ash and light. Before the last of him vanished, he looked at me once more. "Don't let it learn your name. No is ragged." The light swallowed him whole. The door trembled. The myrrh burned hotter, choking the air. And then, from deep inside that glowing throat of stone, a sound came soft, furious, and horribly gentle. It was my own voice. "Please, let me out. Tend." I ran. Up the stair, through the tunnel, into the open air, gasping as cold wind sliced through the smoke. The mountain behind me screamed a single, endless note that wasn't thunder, wasn't human. The abbey collapsed inward, dragging half the slope down with it. Stone, glass, and centuries vanished into a crater that glowed red before the snow smothered it. I didn't stop running until the bells from the valley reached me, ringing wildly, 5 tones repeating. I fell to my knees in the road. The crucifix, or what was left of it, lay in my palm, still hot. The metal pulsed faintly, once more syncing with my heart. And beneath that rhythm, faint but certain, another began to answer. Knock, 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 knock. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound came from within, now deep, patient, and endless. No more doors to open, only the one I'd become. And somewhere far behind me, from the ruins of St. Gertrude, came a final whisper carried on the wind. 6, and still counting. Resser. I don't remember how I left the mountain. They told me a hiker found me 2 days later, barefoot, wandering along the frozen river that cuts through Mittenwald. When they pulled me from the water, I was whispering something over and over in Latin, Porta sexta non clauditur. Wait, the 6th door does not close. The doctors said hypothermia can cause delusions, but they couldn't explain why the frost hadn't touched my skin, or why the ECG machine recorded 2 separate heart rhythms beating in perfect unison. They called it interference. I called it company. On the 3rd night in the hospital, I woke to the smell of myrrh again. Faint, sweet, familiar. The corridor outside my room was empty, the lights dimmed to a sickly yellow. Someone had placed my crucifix, now perfectly whole, on the table beside my bed. I hadn't brought it, and it was warm. I reached for it with shaking hands. The moment my fingers touched the metal, the monitor beside me skipped. The flatline alarm didn't scream, it knocked. Once, twice, thrice, 4, 5, 6. Then silence. The candlelight flickered across the crucifix, casting a long shadow against the wall. The shadow didn't match the object it was standing, tall, human-shaped, head bowed as if in prayer. When I blinked, the figure moved closer, its outline breathing with mine. The lights dimmed further, until only the faint glow from the heart monitor remained. The numbers on the screen flickered, rearranging into a message. 7th door ready. And the crucifix pulsed once in my hand, hot enough to burn. And from the corner of the room, where the drip stand cast its narrow shadow, a voice whispered soft, patient, and achingly familiar. 7 is the last, and it opens upward. Things are forewatching. The walls began to hum, deep and low, like something vast inhaling below the foundations. The crucifix cracked down the middle again, bleeding a thin line of red light. And behind me, just as the heart monitor steadied, came a sound I had prayed never to hear again. Knock. 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 Story 5. The 7th door, Vatican City. I arrived in Rome under a sky the color of candle smoke. The air was heavy with rain, though none fell. From the station, the dome of St. Peter's rose like a stone lung, exhaling centuries of prayer. It was supposed to be holy here, but holiness is only silence that hasn't yet learned to speak. They brought me through a side entrance, not the grand one pilgrims use. Down staircases that grew narrower, older. The guards didn't meet my eyes. They didn't have to, they'd seen the letter. The seal of Saint Gertrude, written in Aurelio's hand, though the man had been dead for weeks. At the bottom of the last stair, the scent hit me myrrh, burnt and wet, the same as always. It clung to the pages of the air, the same way incense clings to scripture. The librarian who met me was blind. He smiled like he'd been waiting. "Every keeper comes home," he said, his Latin too perfect to be human. Then he led me toward the locked vaults. As the door opened, a faint vibration rippled through the floor. Knock, 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 knock. The librarian's name was Father Domenico, though he never once called himself that. He moved through the corridors of the Vatican archives by memory alone, one hand tracing the stone walls like a man reading the pulse of the earth. I followed close behind, lantern in hand, though I quickly learned I didn't need it. The further we descended, the more the air itself began to glow faint, gold, unnatural. The walls changed too. Marble gave way to limestone, limestone to basalt. By the 5th turn, there were carvings in the rock, not Latin, but older, a looping script that coiled like vines. Each symbol ended in 7 dots, unevenly pressed. Domenico ran his fingers across them as we passed. "They record the first knocks," he murmured. "The rhythm that called the heavens awake. Indication." His words struck me like déjà vu. I remembered Aurelio whispering once, in the crypt below St. Harlow's, "It's not evil that speaks. It's creation trying to remember its own name." Nay. When we reached the final passage, Domenico stopped. He tilted his head slightly, listening. "You hear it already, don't you?" To seize. At first, I thought he meant the echo of our footsteps. But then I felt it faint within me. Not outside. My pulse had started to stutter again. 7 beats. A pause. 7 more. A rhythm too steady to be mine. I whispered, "It hasn't stopped since Bavaria, Kennsaft." He smiled, not kindly. "Of course not. It chose you. You carry the 7th door now. Prizes." He pushed the final gate open. The hinges didn't groan. They sang, a low metallic hum that vibrated through my bones. The chamber beyond was enormous, a cathedral beneath a cathedral, its ceiling lost in shadow. At its center stood an altar made of black glass, and around it, 7 pillars carved from a single block of stone. Each pillar was engraved with a different door, some wooden, some iron, some nothing but shadow. Domenico stepped forward. "This is where the sound was first heard," he said softly. "Before prayer, before language, the heartbeat of God before he learned to speak." For a while, I felt the air tighten. The myrrh was stronger now, hurling in my lungs. Something in the glass altar shimmered, like heat above sand. Then I realized it wasn't reflection. It was movement beneath the surface. Something was pressing upward, testing the boundary between the altar and the world. I turned to Domenico. "What's under there?" "Way." He smiled again, blind eyes fixed on nothing. "What's always been under everything," he said. Then he placed his hand flat against my chest, right over my heart. His touch was warm, too warm. "You already hear it," he whispered. "Now let it speak through you." 2000 framed. And from deep within the altar, as if in answer, came the sound that made the stone tremble. Knock, 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 knock. Each one louder than the last. The 7th knock did not fade, it lingered in the bones of the chamber, a resonance that refused to die. It wasn't noise anymore. It was pressure, a vibration so deep it rearranged the silence itself. The black glass altar quivered, the air around it rippling as though submerged beneath invisible water. Father Domenico lowered himself to his knees, head bowed, hands trembling in what looked less like prayer and more like surrender. His lips moved soundlessly. Behind him, the 7 pillars began to hum, each on its own frequency, each answering one of the 7 knocks in turn. The result was harmony, but a kind that hurt to hear, too perfect, too complete. I tried to back away, but the ground beneath my feet pulsed once, forcing me still. The vibration crawled up through my legs, into my ribs, syncing with my heartbeat. I could feel it counting not as a threat, but as recognition. 7 beats, 7 pillars, 7 knocks. The black glass altar began to change. Its surface clouded, then cleared again, like breath fogging and vanishing on a mirror. Beneath it, something vast and shifting took shape, not flesh, not spirit, but pattern. Circles within circles, each lined with faint, glowing symbols that moved of their own accord. Domenico lifted his head. "Do you see it? Way." His voice was almost reverent. The first door opens downward. The last one, he gestured upward with a shaking hand, must open through, end with true tilter. What does that mean? I asked, though I already knew. He turned his blind eyes toward me. It means it can't open here. It needs a body. What is self? The vibration in my chest deepened. My breath caught. Each inhale came with a whisper that wasn't mine, repeating fragments of prayers I didn't know but understood. Ad te clamavi, aperi oculos meos, fiat lumen. I dropped to my knees, clutching my chest. Something inside me was knocking back. The myrrh grew stronger, unbearable now, coating the air in invisible heat. The 7 pillars flared simultaneously, lines of red fire etching across their surfaces. One by one, they cracked open narrow fissures, bleeding light, forming outlines of 7 doors in the air between us. Not real doors, impressions, like memories of entryways. Each knock from below was answered by one from within me. The 2 rhythms merged until I couldn't tell which was heartbeat and which was invocation. Domenico stood, his robes fluttering, though there was no wind. He stretched out his arms, face uplifted. Every age births a keeper, he said, one who opens what should not be kept. You, my son, are the last. The Southend. I shouted over the rising sound. You don't understand. It's not God behind those doors, it's something that remembers him. Mutations. His expression twisted, a flicker of grief crossing his blind face. God forgot himself long ago. We only open what he left unfinished. And 2. The 7th knock hit like a heartbeat against my ribs, so hard I cried out. The glass altar shattered soundlessly, shards rising instead of falling. From the space beneath it, light poured upward, not white, not red, but alive, folding and twisting like smoke that remembered its shape. Within that light, a figure began to form. Not a man, not a creature, just outline. 7 arms, 7 eyes, a crown of symbols burning where a head should be. The pillars leaned toward it, their glow fading as if bowing. Domenico's voice was barely a whisper. The sound before creation. He's speaking again. Was it? The figure's eyes opened 7 rings of pure darkness rimmed with fire. When it breathed, the entire chamber bowed inward. My skin burned where the crucifix rested against it. I tore it from my neck and hurled it toward the light. It froze midair, hovering, glowing red-hot, before melting into a single drop of silver that hung suspended between me and the thing. Then it spoke, not aloud, directly into me. Not in words, but in the only language I had left. Knock, 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 knock. And when the last knock hit, the ground split open beneath my knees, swallowing the light and my voice with it. For a heartbeat, there was no sound. Then a whisper rose from everywhere and nowhere. Now you open upward, as why? The world tilted. The pillars crumbled, and I fell into the sound. I was still falling when the light closed around me. It wasn't like air or water, it was density, a soft, crushing weight that hummed in the shape of 7 heartbeats. My body was there, but thin, drawn out, as though I had become a line in a song that wasn't finished. When the descent finally stopped, I was standing on a floor of polished obsidian that reflected the stars, but I knew I was still underground. Above me, the 7 pillars hung upside down, glowing faintly like dying embers. and in the center of the black expanse stood the thing that had formed beneath the glass altar. It had no face now, only 7 faint outlines of what faces might have been, each one turning toward me, as though listening. The sound it made wasn't speech. It was a rhythm, precise and deliberate. Knock, 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 knock. The echo ran through my chest like current. My ribs expanded too far. My lungs filled with light instead of air. When I exhaled, the breath came out as smoke and the smell of myrrh. Then the voice came, not from the creature but from within the smoke. Soft, calm, my own. You made it to the 7th, it said. Now we finish together. And Godders. I stepped back, shaking my head. No, I didn't open anything. I stopped the 6th. The air trembled as if laughing. Stopping is just another way of saying waiting. 1-4. The 7 faces leaned closer, edges sharpening. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw Aurelio among them, and then Father Domenico, and then faces I didn't recognize but somehow remembered. Each one looked at me the same way a mirror does, empty, patient, endless. Every door was a breath. The voice continued. 7 breaths, 7 names, and you have spoken all of them. Fired. My heartbeat faltered. I never said their names. The ground responded with a knock so deep it lifted the dust from the floor. The figures whispered together in unison. Knock. And the vibration answered. Knock. Each one matched the pulse of my blood until I couldn't tell if I was hearing it or being it. A circle began to glow at my feet, thin and red. Symbols bloomed outward, those same looping shapes I'd seen carved into the stairwells of the vaults. The circle expanded until it reached the feet of the 7-faced being. Its arms rose like branches, slow and reverent. This is where it began, my voice said again. This is where sound learned to mean something, and where silence learned to listen. Trace. I shouted into the void. What are you? Nastin. All 7 faces smiled, and they answered in perfect unison what you were meant to be. Prowl. The knock came again, 7 this time, but faster, stronger, until it was a rhythm that could have shattered mountains. The stars above flickered. The ground began to rise and fall with each pulse, like a giant's chest breathing beneath us. I tried to run. My legs moved, but the space folded around me. Every step only brought me closer to the center. The circle at my feet blazed white-hot. I felt the crucifix burn against my ribs, even though I had thrown it away hours ago. Something inside me was glowing my heart, my bones, my very voice. The thing extended one of its arms toward me, a limb made of smoke and light, and placed its hand over my chest. The pain was exquisite, sharp, clean, holy. For an instant, everything stilled. The 7 faces merged into one, a single shape made of silence and fire. The voice inside me whispered, "Upward, Willag." The ground cracked open, and the stars above fell inward. Light poured through every fracture, not from the ceiling but from beneath. I realized the truth too late. The 7th door wasn't a place, it was a direction. Not a gate to hell, a mirror to heaven. And it was opening through me. My mouth opened without my will, and the sound that came out wasn't a scream, it was a chord, 7 notes in perfect, unbearable harmony. The being mirrored me, each of its mouths moving with mine. The rhythm-aligned heartbeat, knock, word, prayer. Then everything inverted. Light collapsed into shadow. Shadow became sound. And through it all, the voice Aurelio's now, tender and broken, spoke one last time. Every keeper ends where he began. And I looked up. The ceiling had vanished. Above me, the dome of St. Peter's rose impossibly far away, its windows trembling as the world itself began to knock back. When I opened my eyes again, the light was gone. The sound had stopped. There was only stillness, thick, absolute, the kind of quiet that comes after something decides it's finished with you. I was lying on the marble floor of St. Peter's Basilica, the real one. Morning light spilled through the great dome, painting the saints in molten gold. Tourists murmured somewhere far behind the altar, their voices rising and falling like waves on a distant shore. The air smelled of wax and incense and nothing else. No myrrh. I touched my chest. The skin there was tender but unburned. My heartbeat was steady, one rhythm, mine alone. No echo, no second pulse. The crucifix lay beside me, whole and unbroken, gleaming like new silver. For a moment, I almost laughed. Had I dreamt it? Had everything, the knocks, Aurelio, the voices, been nothing more than a fevered delusion? A Swiss guard found me kneeling in front of the altar and asked if I was all right. He said he'd seen me collapse during Mass. I wanted to tell him there was no Mass, no priest, no sound but that. But when I looked around, everything was exactly as it should be. Normal. They let me rest in a side chapel. The candles flickered softly, steady and harmless. Through the open door, I could hear the faint rustle of Rome, the hum of traffic, the shuffle of shoes on stone, the living world returning. It was beautiful. It was ordinary. It was peace. I sat there for hours, hands clasped, waiting for something, anything to move. But the silence held. Even my pulse seemed to hum with relief. That night, the Vatican arranged a small guest room for me inside the Apostolic Palace. A priest came to check on me before sleep. He asked for my name. When I told him, he froze. Just for a second. Then he smiled too quickly and said, "Ah, si, bene," and excused himself. I should have wondered why. Instead, I was too tired. Sleep came slow, heavy, dreamless. When I woke, dawn light was bleeding through the shutters. Somewhere nearby, bells were ringing the first call to prayer. 7 chimes. I smiled, absurdly comforted by the sound. 7. Completion. Rest. But when the last bell faded, a new sound followed. Soft, deliberate. A knock. I froze. Once. Then again. Then a third. Slower. It was coming from the wardrobe in the corner of the room. I sat up, throat dry. The crucifix on the bedside table glowed faintly, a soft pulse in the half-dark. I told myself it was the reflection of dawn. I told myself not to look. But the knock came again, 4 times now, then 5, faster, closer. I stood and took one hesitant step toward the wardrobe. The handle trembled slightly, as if someone on the other side was holding it. The air grew heavy with warmth, and that faint, unmistakable scent bloomed myrrh, sweet and slow, crawling back into the world. My breath hitched. No, it couldn't be. I had closed it. I had seen it end. The sixth knock shook the mirror on the wall. The seventh made the light flicker. Then silence again, perfect, total, waiting. I reached for the crucifix. It burned my fingers. When I lifted it, the metal cracked clean down the middle once more, light bleeding from the fracture like a heartbeat made visible. From the wardrobe, a voice spoke softly. Not a whisper this time. Not even a warning. Just calm, familiar. Upward. Well. The door creaked open a finger's width, and warm air spilled into the room like breath. I dropped the crucifix. It landed on the marble with a sound that wasn't metal. It was the eighth knock, and the floor beneath me answered. The wardrobe door opened slowly, no hand touching it, just the quiet hiss of wood separating from wood. Inside was only shadow at first, but it moved, swelling with each heartbeat. The smell of myrrh rolled out like smoke, wrapping around the bedposts, the crucifix, the walls. My heart stuttered, skipped, then resumed in an unfamiliar rhythm. 7 steady beats, and an 8th that felt like someone knocking from within my ribs. "Who's there?" I whispered. The shadow inside the wardrobe tilted, a shape forming within its depth. At first, it looked like mine reflected in dark glass, but then it stepped out flat at first, then thickening, a body built out of silence. It smiled, not with cruelty, not even joy, just inevitability. "You climbed through 7, it said in my voice. "Now there's nowhere else to go." Drags. I staggered backward until my shoulders struck the window frame. The night outside the Vatican was silver blue, the domes and crosses glinting faintly under the moon. And above it all, the stars pulsed, 7 of them, bright and aligned, as if watching. "What do you want from me?" Craze. The shadow took another step forward. Each footfall made the crucifix on the floor vibrate, faint metallic knocks keeping time with its motion. It raised its hand, and I saw my own scars on its palm, the faint burns from the night beneath St. Gertrude. "To finish the prayer," it said simply. Then it opened its hand, revealing a fragment of glass, the same black shard from the shattered altar in Bavaria. Light pulsed inside it like a trapped heart. The moment I saw it, the air thickened, the candle by the bed flaring tall and blue. Somewhere below, deep within the basilica, the bells began to ring again. 7 tolls, then an 8th. Each toll was heavier, lower, until the walls themselves vibrated. Dust rained from the ceiling. The bed trembled. The crucifix slid across the marble floor, stopping at the shadow's feet. It bent, picked it up, and pressed the 2 halves together. They fused, metal flowing like molten wax. When it straightened, the crucifix was no longer broken. It had changed. Each arm ended in a small, perfect indentation, 7 circles surrounding an 8th, faintly glowing red. "This is the last gate," it said, voice almost kind. "Do you know where it opens?" When I ready fange, I shook my head, tears in my throat. "It's not real," I whispered. "You're not real." Thinks down. It stepped closer. "I wasn't," it said, "until you listened. Now." The light from the crucifix deepened, casting the room into blood-colored tones. The shadow reached toward me and placed the cross against my chest. The metal hissed, burning through cloth and skin, pressing down until it met bone. "Say the word," it murmured. "I won't." "Every flame of lies Swiss." It smiled again. "You already did." And the eighth knock hit, deafening. The floor split, marble fracturing into a ring that circled the bed. From below came a rising sound, thousands of voices layered, humming a single note. The Vatican bells joined them, no longer ringing but chanting. Latin syllables bent backward, turning prayer into something older. The shadow began to dissolve, threads of light unspooling from its body and wrapping around mine. The crucifix grew hotter, the symbols on its surface rotating like gears. I tried to tear it away, but my hands wouldn't move. Every muscle locked, every breath froze in place. And then, through the screaming air, I heard him. "Aurelio, do you see now?" his voice whispered. The seventh was never a door, it was a mouth. Checked her friend. My body convulsed. The cross pulsed once more, 8 bright flashes, and then sank into me, vanishing beneath my skin. The shadow was gone, but its voice remained, now inside my head. "Breathe." And I gasped, and the sound that left my lungs wasn't human. It was a low, rolling knock that carried through the floor, up the walls, out into the night. The Vatican shook. Candles in every chapel flared to life. In the basilica below, the great bronze doors trembled against their hinges. The frescoes on the ceiling rippled, colors bleeding as though the paint itself remembered movement. I stumbled toward the window, barely able to see. Outside, the sky was shifting. The 7 aligned stars were no longer still. They were beating, faint pulses of light syncing with the rhythm inside my chest. A wind rose from nowhere, spinning the clouds into a spiral above the dome of St. Peter's. Then, for the first time in centuries, the dome itself knocked. A deep, resonant sound that rolled across Rome like thunder. Once, twice, 7 times. Each knock answered by the 8th, the one from within me. The window shattered. Light poured in, blinding and white, filling every corner of the room. The last thing I saw was my reflection in the glass eyes glowing like the stars, lips moving without my will, forming the word Aurelio had spoken in the vaults. Upward. Well, the sound consumed everything, stone, breath, thought. And when it finally ended, there was no door, no room, no Rome. Only a single heartbeat, echoing into an endless sky that might once have been heaven, knocking once more to be let in. When the light died, there was no sky, only white, endless, soundless, merciless white. I was standing on something that wasn't floor, though it held my weight. No horizon, no shadow, not even breath. Then, faintly, came a heartbeat. Not mine. Deeper, slower. Each beat shook the world like a pulse through water. 7, then one more. 8. A voice followed, soft and disembodied. "You reached the top. Way." I turned. There was no one. Only a faint distortion in the air, like heat above a candle flame. The voice continued, gentle, almost proud. "Do you know what's above heaven? What it said?" I didn't answer. The silence pressed closer, thick as gravity. "Another door," it said. "The one even God refused to open. Well, The white beneath my feet rippled. Shapes began to form pillars, arches, something like a cathedral drawn out of memory. But everything was inverted. The crosses hung upside down. The altar faced a ceiling of empty stars. At the center stood a figure robed in light. 7 faces, 7 eyes, 1 smile. It raised its hand in greeting. "Welcome home, keeper." Why? I tried to speak, but my mouth moved without sound. Only knocks came out 8, faint, steady, echoing into the infinite. The being nodded, satisfied. Now it begins again. For it is a hound. The space around me folded inward. The pillars twisted into stairways leading downward, through nothingness, back toward the dark. And beneath the rising hum, I heard whispers, millions of them, distant but growing louder, the voices of all who had ever prayed. They weren't calling for God. They were calling for me. The being's final words reached me as the light began to fall. The 8th isn't escape, it's inheritance. Welcames and quietus. And then the white shattered. 7 fragments, each carrying a piece of the world below. Venice, Paris, Yorkshire, Bavaria, Rome, all folding, all knocking. I fell again, through layers of sound and memory, until I hit darkness. And in that darkness, something exhaled. Not a breath. A question. A single, waiting word. Keeper, way she has fried. And somewhere far below, back in the mortal world, a newborn cried for the first time. 7 short wails, and 1 faint knock between them. The sound fades now. Listener, the doors are quiet again. For the first time in a very long time, there are no knocks, no voices, no breathing from beneath the floor. Only the pulse you carry, steady, fragile, human. Every keeper must one day stop counting. Every gate must rest, even if only for a heartbeat. Tonight, the silence above and the darkness below have finally met in the middle, and for a moment, they are one. Perhaps Aurelio found his peace in that meeting. Perhaps you did too. But remember, the rhythm never truly ends. It only waits for the next voice brave enough to listen. So if tonight, as you drift into sleep, you hear something gentle knocking through the walls, don't be afraid. Don't answer quickly. Just breathe once and count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then let the 8th knock pass through you like wind through a prayer. Because the silence that follows, listener, is not the end. It's only the breath before the next story begins. Thank you for listening. If the silence hasn't unsettled you yet, gently tap like and subscribe so you won't miss the next descent. Sleep softly and let the echoes find you when the world forgets to. Well, good night, keeper.